welcome to Exploring Santa Cruz, a biweekly program on KSQD 90.7 FM. And I'm your host today, Mathilde Rand. My guests are Dr. Michelle Merrill and Roland Saher. Our conversation will be about banking for the future, addressing how big banks play a big role in propping up the oil and gas industry and worsening our climate crisis. Dr. Michelle Merrill started Nova Sutras in 2017 as a way to respond to the need for spiritual community centered on the biggest challenge humanity currently faces: how to transition to an environmentally sustainable, just, and spiritually fulfilling human presence on planet Earth. Roland Saher is a retired high school social studies teacher and an activist. He believes that we must look both at how bad the trouble is we're in and the fact that there's hope as long as there are people. He also tries to enjoy the struggle as much as he can. Michelle, would you like to start by telling us a little bit about how the expansion of the fossil fuel industry is worsening the climate crisis?
We know that the climate crisis is really about the buildup of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases in our atmosphere. And we know that the vast majority of that comes from the burning of fossil fuels. What scientists have been making clear for decades, what even Exxon scientists have known for decades, is that as greenhouse gases build up in our atmosphere, we're going to have more fires, more droughts, more extreme storms and floods. Even the fossil fuel industry knew was coming. And the more fossil fuels we use from here on out, the worse it's going to get. If we have any hope at all of staying under 1.5 degrees centigrade of increase in global temperatures and keeping the worst damage under control, it is way past time to stop expanding fossil fuels and leave as much in the ground as we can.
Yeah, and they can do that only if they have the money to pay for the workers, for the machinery, for the computer programs, transportation, the whole lot. That takes billions and billions of dollars. We have some figures for the space between 2016 and 2021, where Chase Bank paid $382 billion, Citi $285, Wells Fargo $272, and BofA, Bank of America, $232. Those are the four biggest lenders to the fossil fuel industry.
And that money is to help the fossil industry to expand. Is that what you're saying?
That's what I'm saying. The fossil fuel industry couldn't do what it's doing without the loans from these banks.
It's ridiculous that banks are continuing to invest all of this money to make the climate crisis worse. What we need to start thinking about is, well, how do we find the power to make this stop? And of course, one of the best ways to stop fossil fuel expansion is to just stop investing in it, stop putting more money there.
Yes, and so we want to tell these banks and all the other banks to stop doing that. And if they don't listen to our words, then we think we should follow with our actions. And that brings us to the point of changing our money from the fossil fuel banks.
So what hold do you think has the fossil industry over the banks to continue to borrow from them? I mean, what's the incentive for the banks to continue doing that? Even if fossil fuel industries themselves are saying, this is not good for climate, this is going to worsen the climate crisis. What is the connection between them?
Well, right now, of course, it's still very profitable, right? If the bank invests some money in a big fossil fuel industry like Exxon going out and drilling more, they're doing that with the expectation that a whole bunch of money is going to come back to that fossil fuel industry. And then, of course, the bank is going to collect a big chunk of that as interest. We have to start somewhere, and we have to really question, is it ethical to keep making money off of something that is doing this much harm. We are talking about loss of life. Not only dozens in the storms here in California, hundreds and hundreds with the wildfires, the increased intensity of hurricanes, all of that in the U.S., but all around the world, there are people, because of droughts, suffering from famines. The flooding in Pakistan last year was just astonishing. It was half the country nearly was underwater. Massive loss of life. How can we let this go on? How can people keep making money off of it?
Actually, there's whole little countries that have to move, have to find some place for their people to go because the land is underwater and people can't live there anymore, can't grow anything anymore.
A lot of small islands like Vanuatu and Tuvalu in the Pacific, their land has shrunk so much that they know they're going to have to move their people out because of sea level rise and increased storms.
Now, you and I hear that. We hear it on the news. We digest it. We try to understand. And we try to talk about it a little bit later about what we can do. But why aren't they getting the message? Is it pure profit? Is it not wanting to hear? Is there alternate reality somewhere? I mean, what is it? I have no insight in the minds of the banking industry.
Neither do I, but it's an eternal question. Or how can you participate in something that you know is not morally defensible? And then, you come up with defenses like, we create jobs. That's a often heard refrain. We can't take the coal miners' jobs away and the roustabouts in the oil fields and so on and so forth.
There's a human factor involved.
Oh, yes.
On the side of, if you want to cut back on the fossil fuel industry, you have people that will lose their jobs.
Absolutely.
Need retraining in something else.
Yes.
Yeah, and there are a lot of people who are working on what they call a just transition away from fossil fuels.
Right.
Because the truth of it is, most more sustainable forms of energy, things like solar and wind, there's actually more potential for jobs in those than there ever were in fossil fuel extraction. It requires more people, and it's so much less harmful. It's a win-win to transition to something like solar or wind energy because you can create more jobs, but you need to make the space for retraining. You need to make the space for taking care of people who have been in these industries that need to stop.
There is sort of something like a moral imperative to my understanding. And if the banks and the fossil fuel industry doesn't want to hear it, we have to scream louder in some way or another.
Okay. And we'll come to that after a little break here.
Okay.
I want to remind you, listeners, that you are listening to Exploring Santa Cruz on KSQD. My name is Mathilde Rand, and my guests are Dr. Michelle Merrill and Roland Saher. Our topic of discussion is how the funding of the fossil fuel industry jeopardizes our future. Many of the climate justice movements are focusing now on influencing the bank. Tell us about that.
Well, there's the fairly well-known organization 350.org, and they, to my understanding, created a special group called Third Act. And they want to particularly address baby boomers. Baby boomers, I include myself certainly, have caused, just by being in this world, a lot of the warming of the atmosphere, and a lot of us own a bit of money. And so we can do something with the money to move the banks that support the fossil fuel industry to step away from that. And so Third Act encourages everybody who has the means, has a bank account with banks that support the fossil fuel industry, to switch their money to a financial organization that does not. They set a date, namely March 21st, 23. That's a nice palindromic date, 32123, by which people sign a pledge to switch their money from the banks that support the fossil fuel industry to another one. And if they all do that at the same time, it hopefully would create a louder message, so to speak.
So say the date again.
March 21, 23.
Okay,
3, 2, 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
Perfect. And so on that date, if millions of people who have our age switch their money from which banks?
The 4 biggest fossil fuel supporting banks are Chase, Citi, Wells Fargo, and Bank of America. There's a bunch of others.
Mm-hmm. But those are the 4 major ones?
Yes.
So people would then go to their banks on that particular date. There's going to be a long line at those banks.
Well, I talked to a bank, a financial institution that does not participate in the support of the fossil fuel industry, Bay Federal, and said, hey, are you prepared to help people with that? They said, yeah, sure. We have lots of people who have home loans, mortgages, car loans, whatever, and we can easily accommodate people who want to switch their money from the fossil fuel banks to us. That can be done fairly efficiently. They're set up to do that. It takes a little bit of planning. The more involved your financial arrangements are, I do want to be really clear. There may be a little bit of a challenge for people who receive their Social Security at BFA or Wells Fargo. That takes a little planning because the Social Security Administration is a little slow on the uptake, but it can be done.
So the advice to people would be is you want to do it, take some time before
Yes.
3/21/23
Or
to start to
Yeah.
to start up
process.
to start the process.
Right.
Start the process with your Social Security.
Talk to Community Credit Union, Bay Federal,
Santa Cruz
LA.
Community Credit Union.
Yes.
Yes, and the Santa Cruz County Bank.
Yeah.
Those are 3.
And there's also Santa Cruz County Credit Union, as far as I know.
Yeah.
So people will do a little preparation, and then
Yeah.
on that big day,
Not everyone has to have all of their money moved by that date, but that's the date where we're going to be probably organizing local actions, showing up at the bank branches and cutting up our credit cards or ATM cards. You can be doing some of the preparation ahead of time, or you can really just start the process on that day. We have some colleagues in an organization called This Is What We Did, who are actually offering what they call learning cohorts, where you kind of work with a team of friends that you meet on Zoom and check in with one another and share tips for how to get your money moved. Mm-hmm. And I do believe that Third Act is going to be offering something like that as well. I'm not certain. But I know that those resources to support people in moving their money are available. And one of the things that Third Act is asking is sign the pledge today. Sign the pledge today. And then you've got a couple of months to get it all worked out and figure out how you want to be most effective at moving your money. And if you happen to be one of these people who doesn't have any money involved in one of these big 4, there's another pledge that you can sign that just says, I am never going to give you my money as long as you are funding fossil fuels.
Right.
So young people, if you don't have a bank account yet, or if your only bank accounts are with local credit unions, that's wonderful. Go ahead and sign that other pledge that says, I will never put money into one of these fossil bad banks.
so there's something to do for everyone.
Yeah.
Young,
Yes.
old, having
Absolutely.
money in those 4 banks, Citi, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, and Chase.
Yep.
And then some others, you said. Or if you don't have money there, you can say, I'll never do it. And that's on the website for Third Act.
That's on the Third Act website, yeah. Third Act, and then I think the page you're looking for is called Bug the Banks.
Yeah,
And
go
then
ahead.
This Is What We Did is also very interesting for people
Yeah.
to get support. And
Yeah,
then
folks.
there's more that people can do, and that is to tell others. We know that conversations about climate change have been very, very helpful in moving the needle in the right direction. There are some who think that President Biden moved to close some pipelines, oil pipelines, only because so much pressure was there from the public. And so every conversation about climate change, including switching your money, will help with that. It's a seemingly small act, but it's a very important act.
The interesting thing to me is the major thing that you're talking about. We can do this from our living room. We
Yes.
sign the pledge one way or the other. We have the money in there, say, I'm going to move it out. Or if I don't have my money in those 4 banks, I'm going to sign the pledge. I can do it from my living room.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
And then
You can do it on your phone.
and then walking around in the woods, enjoying nature.
Yes.
And then the other thing you can do is, if you want to be active, on the day itself, 3/21/23, there will be actions. There will
Yes.
be organized at the banks where people will gather and cheering on people who go inside the bank who say, I'm taking my money out. Or just in general, making known that this is very important for us.
Yes.
Now, of course, the people at the bank are going to be scared. I've seen that before, that they have police standing there. And all. But this is a very non-violent action because banks serve a good purpose for a lot of people.
Yes.
But what you want is, if you take out your money away from the fossil fuel industry, I'll come back to you.
Yeah.
We have nothing
Yes,
against you
that's
as an
right.
institution.
That's right.
But as long as you have money supporting the fossil fuel industry, I don't want my money there.
Right.
Now, didn't you mention to me, Roland, that one bank, foreign
Yes.
bank already was influenced?
Yes. The 13th largest supporter of the fossil fuel industry is HSBC. It's a European bank. And it has committed itself to stop doing that this spring. And it did so because of public pressure. So there's a precedent, and we can push for more of that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now, tell me, there must be other organizations that you are aware of that are trying to accomplish it. We mentioned Third Act, and then this is...
This is what we did.
Right.
That means also baby boomers who were thinking into the future. What would we want to be able to say to our grandchildren when they ask, well, what did you do?
Right.
Well, this is what we did.
I prepared myself, went to Third Act. I saw there's an educators working group that tries to form collectives of educators and spreading all over the country and helping each other, because this is not an easy thing to do. You're in the habit of going to a particular bank, your parents probably banked there, and so they have these collectives of educators working group, which I thought was very good.
I heard that, and I heard also lawyers. Third Act has a special group for lawyers because there's probably some legal aspects to it. I don't see it yet, but I assume there is something to it.
And then I saw an organization called bankforgood.org. And then there's one called Green America.
Oh, I haven't
And
seen
so
that
there
one.
are, from different angles, people are basically gearing up to the same thing, which is very encouraging. I want to tell you the story about my friend who is gone several years ago. She talked to me about 10 years ago, and I'm not sure how she picked it up, but she said, my money is, I believe it was at Chase. And she said, I don't want it there anymore because I don't like what they're doing with the money. So I had to help her, and it was quite complicated. So I helped her. I was doing her finances at that point for her and her husband. And she was very, very firm. She was in her 80s. She said, this is what I want. Make it happen. And it was a really enjoyable thing to do, except for jumping through all the hoops. It wasn't that easy because she had different accounts and different CDs and things like that. It becomes a little bit difficult when you either pay a penalty. So every time when a CD was due, we moved it over.
Right.
And she was very firm, and she couldn't walk very well, but here we went in her car to the bank, and here was another thing she was doing. And I tell you, that really gave her satisfaction that she was doing something, we're talking morally correct.
Yes.
And it was truly an amazing experience. She did it 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So she was the head of everybody else. I can't tell her right now that we have this big thing coming up because she unfortunately passed away a couple years ago. But I can imagine that people doing this are going to get some satisfaction.
Yes.
And if you help each other and be in these collectives, people will get some satisfaction and maybe some more hope for the future.
Yes, absolutely. The news from the scientists is dire. And I mean, it's just about every day there's something bad happening in terms of how climate change is getting worse and so on and so forth. And as you said earlier about my motto is we're in deep doo-doo, but there is hope.
Right.
And this, what we're promoting here, is something where people can say, yes, this is something I can do and I will do, and it may be difficult, but it's so worth it.
And you're doing it for the future generation.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now, if people want to contact you, I understand that people can contact Dr. Michelle Merrill at her website, novasutras.org, novasutras.org, or email her, Michelle with 2 L's, at novasutras.org.
Yeah.
And Roland, people can contact you at Roland Saher at gmail.com, which is spelled ROLANDSAHER at gmail.com.
Yes.
We have a few moments for some final thoughts, so let's start with you, Roland.
I'm excited about this, and I hope that somehow we inspire some people, a few people who will then inspire others. This is a little bit of what we can do, but the progress that we have made comes with all these little steps that we get to take. And often there are defeats, but we can't let go of keep our eyes on the prize. This is so worth it.
And I think this is such a great example of an action that anyone can get involved in at any level, whether you want to just sign a pledge and hopefully follow through with that, or show up on the streets with us on 3/21/23, right? March 21st. It's so rewarding to be with a community that is getting themselves into alignment with what their real values are. It feels good to do the right thing.
And hopefully you will help people in the banking industry grow themselves and change, like the ASBC Bank in Europe, and which A, is doing the right thing, and B, is probably keeping its customers.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's very important. I want to thank you both for being here. I want to remind people that you've been listening to Exploring Santa Cruz with Dr. Michelle Merrill of Nova Sutras, and Roland Saher. He works also with the Santa Cruz Community Action Network. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having us.